I married young, at 24, to a man who seemed perfect. We were best friends, lovers, dreamers. But 7 years in, our connection had thinned to something polite, quiet, routine. We still shared meals, talked about our days, even laughed sometimes. But he hadn't touched me in months, not intimately. His kisses were brief, more habit than hunger. I'd brush his hand at night, hoping he'd respond. He never did. Work stress, he said. Exhaustion. But the distance felt personal. I started to feel like a roommate. Not unloved, but unseen. And in those late hours after he'd fallen asleep, I found myself scrolling Reddit, not just for distraction, but for something I couldn't name. I ended up in threads where people confessed things they couldn't say out loud. Affairs. Desires.
Shame.
Relief. I didn't post at first. I'd just read. But it stirred something. Their honesty, their recklessness. It felt raw and alive. One night I wrote a post. Just a few paragraphs. I didn't say anything explicit, just that I was married, bored, and confused about what I wanted. I expected judgment. Instead, I got attention. Messages flooded in. Most were crude. A few were thoughtful. One stood out. A man said he understood. That sometimes the soul needs something the marriage can't hold. I didn't respond at first. But the next night, I read his message again. I clicked his profile. He seemed real, grounded, not looking for sexting or fantasy. Just connection. I replied, cautiously. We talked about books, about feeling stuck, about what marriage does to passion. It was nothing dangerous. But it felt dangerous. Because it mattered to me. My husband didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. That silence hurt more than anything. I started dressing nicer around the house. Nothing. I'd make his favorite meals. He'd say thanks and go back to his phone. I realized I was begging to be noticed in ways he'd long stopped seeing. The man I met online asked for my number. I hesitated. Then gave it. We didn't call. Just texted. Every day. It was subtle, never sexual. But I caught myself smiling at my phone in ways I hadn't in years. I waited for his messages. I woke up thinking about them. My husband, meanwhile, barely looked up. I told myself it was harmless, that I wasn't cheating. But something had already shifted. I was craving someone else's attention more than my husband's. And I was starting to justify it. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. But deep down, I knew. Emotional affairs are quiet. They bloom slowly, like mold. By the time you see the damage, it's already spread. I still loved my husband. Or maybe I loved the version of him that used to exist. The man who used to pull me into bed in the middle of the afternoon. The man who used to want me. Now I felt like a ghost in my own home. And someone else, someone I hadn't even met, was starting to make me feel real again. He asked if I wanted to meet. No pressure, just coffee. I stared at the message longer than I should have. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, rehearsing polite refusals. But I typed yes. We met 2 days later. I wore a dress I hadn't touched in a year. He complimented it before I even sat down. We talked for over an hour. Nothing overtly flirtatious. But there was something in his eyes, attention, interest. I hadn't felt that in so long. It made me lightheaded. When we stood to leave, he touched my elbow. Just lightly. But it was the first time in a year I'd felt someone's touch with intent. In the parking lot, he leaned in. I should have stepped back. I didn't. His lips brushed mine. I froze for a moment. Then I kissed him back. Short, hungry, guilty. I didn't look back as I got into my car. I didn't tell my husband. I didn't confess. But I didn't stop either. We kept messaging. We met again and again. I told myself I was just reclaiming a part of me that had died. That I could control this. That it wouldn't go too far. But it already had. The third time we met, I didn't even try to pretend we were just talking. He pulled me close, and I didn't hesitate. We ended up in the back seat of his car. It was fast, intense, and messy. I didn't even feel guilt afterward. Just clarity. I had crossed the line, and part of me was relieved. I should have felt more ashamed. But I didn't. Instead, I felt alive. Desired. I told myself that this man was filling a gap, not replacing my husband. I compartmentalized. I went home, made dinner, smiled like nothing had changed. And my husband, as always, didn't ask questions. Didn't notice the change in my mood, the sudden energy I carried. Or maybe he noticed and chose to ignore it. The second man came through mutual friends. A housewarming party, some drinks, a harmless conversation that turned flirtatious. I felt bold. I leaned in. He asked if I was really married. I said yes. He asked if that mattered. I said not always. I left with his number. We met a week later at his apartment. There was no build-up. He pressed me against the wall, and I let him. It wasn't romantic. It was raw, selfish, physical. I didn't even remember his last name. Now I had two. One for connection, one for escape. And I still wasn't sure what I was looking for. But I kept going. I wasn't addicted to the sex. I was addicted to being wanted, to feeling seen. Every message, every glance, every hand on my body was proof that I still had something to offer. That I wasn't invisible. I stopped justifying it. I stopped pretending I was trying to fix anything. I wasn't. I was chasing a high. And part of me wondered if I even wanted to be caught. He found out. I don't know how long he'd known, but one night, after dinner, he just asked me how many. I didn't lie. I told him 2, though by then it was already 3. I expected yelling, maybe silence. Instead, he sat there calm. He said he had suspected for months. That he'd seen messages on my locked phone screen. That he had read one of my Reddit posts after recognizing the writing style. He hadn't confronted me because he wasn't sure he wanted to stop it. I asked him what that meant. He said he couldn't explain it exactly. That part of him hated it, but another part was curious. He said he had dreams where I was with someone else, and he would wake up aroused. He didn't understand it, but it was real. I thought he was playing mind games. But he looked me straight in the eye and said, "What if I don't stop you?" I didn't answer. I went to bed sick with confusion. The next morning, he brought it up again. Calmly. He said he didn't want a divorce. That our marriage had changed, but he wasn't ready to end it. He said he wanted rules. Transparency. No lies. If I was going to keep seeing other men, he wanted to know. Everything. I asked if he was serious. He said he wanted to try. Not for revenge. Not out of weakness. But because he wanted to understand this part of me. We laid out boundaries. No mutual friends. No emotional entanglements. Condoms always. And full disclosure, he wanted to hear about each man, each moment. I thought it was a trap. But when I told him about the third man, he just nodded. He asked questions. Specific ones. I told him more than I should have. And he listened. Not angry. Not cold. Just intent. I didn't know what to feel. There was no thrill of secrecy now. But something else took its place. Control, honesty, and a strange kind of power. I became bolder. I stopped pretending. The fourth man was a bartender I met during a girls' night out. He was young, full of energy, didn't ask questions. I didn't even exchange last names. I came home that night, still flushed, and told my husband everything. He didn't flinch. He just asked if I enjoyed it. By then, something in me had shifted. This wasn't about cheating anymore. This was a version of consent neither of us had expected. I was still stepping outside the marriage, but with his permission, and it felt even more transgressive. Like we were both breaking the rules together. But it also changed the way I saw him. He wasn't the passive, distant man anymore. He was watching, listening, choosing not to stop me. And that choice gave him more power than I realized. It made me question who was really in control, and whether I was still chasing freedom or walking into something even more complicated. I thought exploring other men would give me clarity, that I'd discover who I really was outside the boundaries of marriage. But the more I indulged, the more I realized how blurred everything had become. Each man had offered something different. The first gave me attention. The second, lust. The third, emotional comfort. The fourth didn't even speak much. He just took what I offered, and for some reason, that felt freeing. But none of them stayed. None wanted more than the moments we shared. They didn't ask about my day. They didn't know my favorite song. They didn't care who I was outside the bedroom. And suddenly, that mattered again. Because while I thought I was reclaiming myself, I was just scattering pieces in different directions, hoping one of them would feel whole. At home, things changed. My husband and I spoke more than we had in years. But every conversation was laced with this unspoken tension. He knew everything. Every name, every detail. I told him when it happened, how it made me feel. He listened like a confessor. Sometimes I caught a flicker of arousal in his eyes. Other times, just pain. But he never told me to stop. One night, I asked him why. Why he let it continue. Why he hadn't walked away. He said something that stayed with me. Because maybe this is who you've always been. And maybe I love you enough to let you be her. I didn't have a response. I wasn't sure if that was love or resignation. But it hit something deep. The irony is, his acceptance made me feel more guilty than his silence ever did. I wanted him to fight for me, to be angry, to make me choose. But he didn't. And that made me realize something I hadn't admitted to myself. I wanted the drama, the stakes, the emotional chaos. I didn't want a calm man who let me roam. I wanted someone who made me stay. The men stopped feeling exciting. The rush faded. I found myself comparing them to my husband, the way he knew my moods, the way he still made my coffee without asking, the way he watched me now, not with detachment, but with this strange reverence, like he was waiting for me to come back to him. Not physically, emotionally. Eventually, I stopped meeting new men. Not because I felt guilty, but because I no longer needed the validation. I had exhausted the illusion that being wanted by others would fill the emptiness. It hadn't. It just made me aware of how far I'd drifted from myself. My husband and I are still together. We don't talk about labels. We don't define what we are. Some days I still feel the urge to wander. Some days I don't. But we've reached a place where everything is known. Nothing is hidden. There's a strange peace in that. Not forgiveness, maybe not even healing, but honesty. And in a way, that's more intimate than anything else I've done.